I'll begin. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexander Kolokotronis. I'll be moderating this presentation tonight. I am director of the Naugatuck Valley Project and the Naugatuck Valley Housing Development Corporation. I want to start off with a housekeeping item. Uh, we will have Spanish interpretation tonight. Please look to the function at the bottom of your screen where interpretation should be available.
Buenas tardes. Esta tarde vamos a tener interpretación simultánea en vivo en español en el webinario. Para activar la función de interpretación, vayan a la parte inferior de su pantalla y hagan clic en el globo. Seleccionen su idioma y pueden poner en silencio el audio original. Algunas veces no aparece el globo al final de su pantalla y tienen que ir a los tres puntitos que dicen More o más y seleccionar Interpretación de idiomas del menú desplegable. Gracias. You may turn on interpretation.
Great, wonderful. Thank you for that. Again, hi everyone. My name is Alexander Kolokotronis, director of the Naugatuck Valley Project, Naugatuck Valley Housing Development Corporation. The Naugatuck Valley Housing Development Corporation is a community land trust based in Waterbury, where we steward six housing cooperatives comprising 102 units. Our community land trust was founded in 1989, and so I'm very excited to be moderating this presentation tonight from Jason Webb. Jason Webb is Community and Technical Assistance Principal at the Grounded Solutions Network. Jason has close to 40 years of experience in community organizing and revitalization. He was instrumental in the revitalization of a community in Roxbury, Massachusetts called Dudley Street, as highlighted in the award-winning documentaries Holding Ground, Gaining Ground, and the book called Streets of Hope. Here's the book right here. I recommend. It's a great book and goes into detail about what that work looked like and continues to look like to this day. At Grounded Solutions, his primary area of work is to support nonprofit organizations and public agencies to explore, adopt, and implement housing policies and programs with lasting affordability that advance racial equity and inclusion. Jason has led technical assistance engagements in over 50 communities, such as Louisville, Kentucky, Memphis, Tennessee, Baltimore, Maryland, Durham, North Carolina, and New Orleans, Louisiana, and he serves as a primary point of contact for fee-for-service engagements by providing the subject matter expertise rooted in those decades of experience. I'd like to make a note before I hand it over to Jason that we're very excited to see the attendance here tonight. The idea for this webinar series is rooted in conversations we've been having across the state of Connecticut. In many cases, unprompted, folks would bring up the notion of land trusts or community land trusts as a response to the growing affordability crisis in terms of housing. And also, I think, in part, in response to the crises we have around community and needing to build community fabric and sustain community fabric. So this webinar series is rooted in those conversations. It's rooted in you and the folks such as you attending tonight. And we have people from all corners of the state attending here. So with that, I'll also like to note that we will have a poll to see where people's knowledge level is at. And so we'll run that poll for a bit. Um, let's see. Great. Uh, Wonderful. We have a range of folks in terms of familiarity with the subject matter of CLTs. Uh, and again, we will have questions that can be entered into the Q&A function. We will answer as many questions as possible after the moderated conversation, but that'll again come later on in the webinar tonight. So thank you again for participating. For those entering, there's live interpretation. Look to the globe at the bottom, and we will have questions following the presentation. So now I'll hand it over to Jason.
Thank you, Alex. Again, thank you everybody for taking the time and being with us tonight. I'm going to go ahead and set up my presentation that talks a little bit about the community land trust model. And where I love to start these conversations is to just center us on just the 2-minute version of what a community land trust is.
Community land trusts, or CLTs, are nonprofit organizations that acquire, own, and steward land permanently for the common good. The most common CLT land use is housing, but retail, office, and a variety of other uses are possible. CLTs give formal decision-making voice and power to local community residents in determining land uses. Here's how CLTs make home buying affordable for families in their communities. First, the CLT builds or buys homes using one-time public or private investment. Next, the CLT sells just the home to a low-income buyer who qualifies for a mortgage, and the CLT keeps the land, holding it in trust for future generations of home buyers. In return for being able to buy a home at a discounted price, the family agrees to pay it forward and sell to another low-income family at a price they can afford. The CLT manages the sales process, ensuring that each home-buying family builds some wealth from a predetermined, limited amount of the sales proceeds. In this way, the one-time public or private investment in CLT homes makes lasting affordability a reality and stabilizes communities. And CLTs benefit the larger community too, as they preserve and protect housing for long-term residents, helping to build stronger, safer, and higher quality diverse neighborhoods, contributing to greater educational attainment, employment opportunities, and health outcomes. Visit groundedsolutions.org to learn more about CLTs today.
So that really synthesizes what the community land trust is. Now, what I hope to do is for us to take a few steps back. This model here is a 54-plus-year-old model. So let us go through some of the roots of the community land trust to truly understand why some of the founders of this model created it in the first place and what they were actually striving to do. So to do that, we're actually going to go back in time as to why a community land trust was needed.
Many African Americans were sharecroppers and tenant farmers in Georgia, Alabama, in Mississippi, and Tennessee. And when they attempted to register to vote, they forced off of the land.
So a lot of folks don't know, but the late great John Lewis is actually one of the founders of the community land trust model. And what Mr. Lewis really talks through is what was happening in the Deep South. That again, these African American farmers were trying to exercise their right to vote, and they were literally being forced off of the land that they had been working on for so long. Now, here on the screen breaks all of the rules of PowerPoint because you're not supposed to have this many pieces of information on one slide. But we went ahead and we traced back the roots of the community land trust. And what this slide really represents is the fact that the founders of the model were impacted by a number of different movements. Now, some of these movements were here in the United States. Other movements were actually across the globe. So when you think about the U.S. peace movement, when you think about the single tax movement, when you even think about the Grand Dame movement that was over in India, all of those had a profound impact on the founders of the community land trust model. But where the community land trust model comes from here in the United States is from the U.S. civil rights movement. Now we'll hear from one of the other founders of the community land trust model as to the reason why he felt it was so important to get land.
I woke up this morning in my mind. You woke up this morning in my mind. I was canvassing on the plantation. I knocked on the door of a man and his wife. They promised me they'd come to the mass meeting. They comes to the church with their 5 children. They told me that they had been kicked off the plantation, had nowhere to go for the night. How many people whose doors I've knocked on got kicked out of their homes with their children, without a job? And I was partially the cause of it. So I lived in deep guilt and frustration. So that's how the spark of the need for land came to me. Seeing the land, and just the land itself, the beauty of the land, the purity of the land, and the acknowledgement that all power comes from the land, and the land comes from God. All power comes from the land. Absolute power comes from God. And that's my ministry. It's still my ministry.
So that is the late, great Dr. Charles Sherrod. Unfortunately, we lost Dr. Sherrod a few years ago, but his ministry continues to live in a number of us that want to see this work continue to spread. Our story starts in 1968 when an American delegation went over to Israel. And they went over to Israel because they heard about this model called the Musha model. And this model had a unique ability of combining individual homesteads, cooperative farming on leased land. Now, this American delegation was so impressed by what they saw, they asked, can we bring some of the legal documents back here to the United States? And when they got back here to the United States, they started to bring together a round table of civil rights activists, churches, folks that were in workforce advocacy, and really started to craft a new blueprint around land tenureship. What this led to was New Communities Incorporated. Now, New Communities Incorporated in 1969 is, in fact, the first community land trust here in the United States. And they were actually started with over 6,000 acres of land in Georgia. And at the time, New Communities, Inc. was the largest Black-owned landowner in the entire United States. And their idea was simple, and that is that as a collective, it would be a lot more difficult to go ahead and push us off of the land because we've all tried to do it individually and we have all been hurt by that system. Now, in 1970, this model that was initially created to help specifically Black farmers in the South started to take a urban context. The first urban community land trust was created in Cincinnati, Ohio. And it was created with the understanding that in the downtown area of that city was going through a revitalization and an expansion, and that there was a lower income community that was right next door to the downtown district. And the first urban community land trust was created to help to protect that community from displacement. In the 1980s is when we started to see municipalities go ahead and step up to start to support community land trust. Now, some of the most notable municipalities to do this was in Burlington, Vermont, where a mayor by the name of Bernie Sanders wanted to take a very much progressive housing policy approach and supported the creation of the Burlington Community Land Trust, which is now known as the Champlain Housing Trust, which is the largest community land trust here in the United States, with over 3,000 units in its portfolio. Another community land trust that was created out of a partnership with the city is my own community land trust that I operated for several years of Dudley Neighbors Incorporated in Boston, Massachusetts. Dudley was created, and it was a very unique partnership with the municipality because that community land trust is still the only community land trust in the entire United States that was able to get the power of eminent domain to actually acquire private vacant land that accounted for about half of the community that we were trying to revitalize. Also, in the 80s, we saw the ultimate heartbreak because in 1985, New Communities, Inc. actually was foreclosed on, and they lost all over 6,000 acres of land. Now, New Communities, Inc. lost their land not due to a flaw in the community land trust model. They lost their land because of the entrenched racist policies of the state of Georgia. Now, between 1980 and 1985, Georgia saw unprecedented drought where, unfortunately, unlike their white counterpart farmers, New Communities, Inc. could not secure government-backed loans to be able to carry them through. Where New Communities, Inc. had to do was actually encumber their land, basically take a mortgage out on their land to keep their operations going. Now, you can do that for 1 year. You can even do that for 2 years. They had to do that for 5 years. And at the 5th year, unfortunately, the debt burden was just too much for them to handle. So New Communities, Inc. did lose all of their land in 1985. But that's not where the story ends, because in the late 90s, New Communities, Inc., both Charles Sherrod and his wife Shirley Sherrod, went ahead and signed on to a class action lawsuit against not just the state of Georgia, but also the United States Department of Agriculture. And they were able to show a federal judge all of the practices that led to their demise. And they won a $12 million settlement from that case. Now, when you win a multi-million-dollar case because the federal government ruined your plans of community collective ownership of land, what do? For New Communities, Inc., they went out and they bought more land to start their operations back up. They bought a former plantation in Albany, Georgia, and this plantation at one time used to house about 100 slaves. So New Communities, Inc. now runs this former plantation, and they do farming. They have a conference center. They have an Airbnb rental, and they are known as Resora. And one of the things that Shirley Sherrod always wanted to make sure that we can go ahead and farm the land and also nurture the mind and empower our community. So New Communities is back. They are stronger than ever, and they continue to be a beacon for all community land trusts to understand our roots of this model. Now, the founders of the community land trust model was very clear in terms of how they defined this model and why is it different than other nonprofit organizations. So a community land trust is a democratically structured nonprofit with an open membership and a board of directors that is elected by that membership. The founders truly believed that this idea of an open membership was important to have checks and balances for the nonprofit, where again, the nonprofit would be accountable back to the residents and the community in which it's serving in. So they wanted to make sure that the membership rights were very broad, but also made the organization truly accountable that it could not go in a different direction without it being community led and community owned. Now, the great thing about this model is that we have been growing exponentially every single year. Right now, there are over 340 of these organizations throughout the entire United States. You could easily double this number when you think about worldwide how many community land trusts there are. But here in the United States, we're in 46 states, plus the District of Columbia and in Puerto Rico. Now that we've gone through some of the roots of the community land trust, let's explore some of the basics of what makes this model. Now, a community land trust is traditionally a nonprofit organization that acquires, owns, and stewards land permanently for the common good. The great thing about this model is that anything you can do with real estate, you can do with a community land trust. I've had an amazing career where I can confidently say that I've done affordable housing, I've done commercial space, I've also done some community spaces, farming, and open land, all on a community land trust. Because it's about who gets to make those decisions. Is it folks that are not in our community and are from the outside trying to tell our community what's best for us? Or is it the community knowing what's best for us and putting it in place? There are some core elements that make a community land trust a community land trust. According to our founders, membership and governance is an important element that is in all CLTs. Holding land and subsidy in trust is another one. The last one is about this idea of stewardship. Community land trusts sign long-term agreements and make a commitment with those homeowners that we are here to support their journey for as long as they want to be in the home. But the classic community land trust is a nonprofit organization. It has a defined service area. It has what's called this corporate membership, which again is this open membership that basically states that anybody that lives or works in that area can pay to become a member of the CLT. The community land trust also has a very distinct board structure. Now, this board is called a tripartite board, and it's broken into 3 equal elements. community members, leaseholders, and public stakeholders. Now, having leaseholders who are actually signing these leases and bringing that perspective onto the board is very unique and is what makes a community land trust unique from other forms of nonprofit housers, where again, we want to make sure that we know who is accepting our services and we put them onto our board to influence and to guide where the organization goes. Now, a community land trust uses a very unique ownership model, and it's unique because it's for housing. I will say that this type of ownership structure is not unique when it comes to the world of commercial development. But for home ownership, this dual ownership where the individual owns the improvements and the community land trust owns the land, still to this day is pretty unique. A 99-year ground lease is what ties the improvements and the land together. And I say it's unique for home ownership and it's not for commercial, because in the commercial field, having a dual ownership structure is pretty common. If you ever think of large corporations like the McDonald's Corporation, the McDonald's Corporation owns the land underneath all of their locations. And it's the franchise owner that actually owns the building and leases the land from the corporation along with the franchise license that they have. Another example on the commercial side is the retailer Walmart. Walmart does not own any of the land that's underneath their stores. They predominantly ground lease it, so then if they ever need to shut down a store, they don't have to worry about figuring out how to dispose of that land. They go ahead and they ground lease it, and if they need to close down a store, they can easily close down the store and write the building off as a loss and keep moving on. So what the founders and their brilliance said is, if we can do this with commercial, and we see this happening every day, how can we take our United States real estate law and use it to protect our people? Now, the idea of permanent affordability with the community land trust is actually a pretty simple equation. Now, when we go ahead and sell the home, we are going to lower the price intentionally compared to the market, because we want to lower the price to what the family can afford. Now, at the time of resale, the family is going to agree to sell the property again at a lower price compared to the market to allow for another family to have this opportunity. And we feel like, and studies have shown, that we can do this with multiple families going through one home. But let's take a look at what the community land trust is really trying to strive for. So hypothetically, we're in a community where the market price of a home is $200,000, but a family can only afford $155,000 in terms of a purchase price on a new home. So there's $45,000 that is an affordability gap. And it's something that would need to be filled for this family to be able to go ahead and purchase this home. Now, the sad reality in a lot of our communities is that the affordability gap is never going to shrink. It's always going to grow larger and larger over time. And that is predominantly because our wages every year, as we get raises and bonuses and stuff like that, our wages are not growing at the same rate as the market real estate prices are growing. Now, the community land trust itself is trying to seek a fair balance, and they are trying to find a balance on some topics that may be competing against one another, and they have some tension. Sometimes there's tension between what individuals want and what the community wants. We all know that there's a tension around this concept of wealth creation with the idea of affordability. As anybody that has ever owned a home before, you know that there are some risks that come with home ownership along with the rewards that come with home ownership. The community land trust model has been a proven tool to be able to find a fair balance on this seesaw. But let's go ahead and let's take a look at a real life example. We have a community land trust that is in the Pacific Northwest. And in 1998, they were working with a homeowner that was making $13,000 a year. She was able to go ahead and save about $1,155 for her cash down payment. Now, according to how much she was making, her affordable rent should have been $475 a month. But unfortunately, where she was living, there was no affordable rentals. So she was forced to go ahead and to be rent burdened by paying $700 in a fair market rent situation. The community land trust came along and was able to build a 2-bedroom, 1-bath home for her. They were able to sell it to her for $95,375. They took her money that she saved for cash to close, and she had a mortgage payment of principal, interest, taxes, and insurance of $450. Now, that is even lower than what her rental situation should have been if she had an affordable rent. 20 plus years go by, and it's actually time for her to sell the property. This young lady here actually got a great job opportunity and she had to relocate. So she was ready to pay it forward to another family. According to their formula, she was able to go ahead and sell her property for $147,000. She was able to pay off her mortgage of $90,000. Now, while the mortgage payoff does seem pretty high for being in the home for 20 plus years, there is an explanation for that. At year 10 of her living in the home, she was able to do a cash out refinance and took some of the equity that she built up over 10 years. So that's why her mortgage payoff is a lot higher than what you would expect after 20 plus years of mortgage payments. Her cost of closing was about $5,800. She also had some repairs that she had to do to the property before it could be transferred to another homeowner. This is another element of the community land trust model that is pretty unique. The community land trust will not allow homeowners to sell their property if they are not in good repair. We do not want to burden the next homeowner with a lot of repairs that would need to be done. So she walked away at that closing table with a certified check of $40,200. Now, let's talk about this concept of wealth creation, because we hear it a lot. And we always hear that, people should have as many different avenues for wealth creation. And some folks do criticize the community land trust model because they feel like we stifle wealth creation when it comes to home ownership. So let's take a look at her example, and you guys can tell me if you feel like that this was a fair deal or not. But where we start is how much did she personally invest in this property, which was $1,155. And what she walked away with was over $40,000. Now, I know that I personally have a 401k savings, and I would love for those types of returns for my type of retirement account, but I don't see those types of returns practically anywhere. But let's remember that she also had $450 monthly payments. So these were incredibly affordable payments that she had on this home. Now, let's also remember that she had about $51,100 in rent savings. That's the difference between that $450 and the $700 that she was in that rental situation. Now, when we calculated this, we didn't even attribute any inflation that she would be paying over those 20 years. We just did a straight line calculation on. And then she had a beautiful home that she loved for 20 plus years. And she also had the cash at the closing table. So from our perspective, she walked away with a $91,300 financial benefit just by being a community land trust homeowner. And again, this is just on the real estate transaction. This doesn't even account for the fact that she may have gotten raises at work. She may have done some investments. She may have done a number of other things to build up her wealth. So from a real estate transaction, $91,300 of a financial benefit, in my experience and in my expertise, would be a really good return when you've only put down $1,100. But let's talk about this next family, because again, remember, she is paying it forward to another family that is in need of housing. So here is this couple. They bought this home. Their earnings were about $37,000 a year. And this was in 2021. The fair market rent that they had to pay, because there were no affordable rentals where they were, was a little bit less than $2,100. So they were able to go ahead and purchase this property for $155,000, and their mortgage payment is a little bit more than $1,000 a month. So that means every month they are saving a little bit more than $1,000, $12,000 a year. We'll be able to update this slide when this family goes ahead, and sells this property, and who the next buyers will be, how much they would see in wealth creation. Now, the community land trust, as in its core, is saying to individuals that we want to sign a 99-year ground lease with you. Now, that's a long time. And one of the things about this arrangement is that we are taking on this perpetual responsibility as an organization to do stewardship. Now, community land trusts do stewardship in 3 different ways, and we do it all at the same time. So we're stewarding the structures. So we're stewarding the homes of the property. The homes need to be in good condition, because we want to make sure that multiple families can actually have an opportunity to get into these homes. So we will work with homeowners on maintenance workshops, giving them education, sometimes resources, and making sure the homes are always in good repair. We will also go ahead and steward the leaseholders and the homeowners specifically. We know that, unfortunately, if you don't give people proper education, and sometimes guardrails, some folks can make some really, really bad decisions on their home. That played out in the 2008-2009 mortgage collapse, where a lot of those individuals that lost their home through to predatory lending. So the Community Land Trust will make sure that any financial transactions that happen on this property, we will review, and we have to give you the approval if you want to go ahead and get a certain mortgage, because our job is to protect this community asset. The next stewardship piece is around subsidy. We know that we're going to need to leverage and actually ask, whether it's local government, whether it's state government, whether it's federal government, for the resources to fill that affordability gap. We also know that some CLTs have been very successful in asking private industries and also private foundations to come up with those resources as well. We make a promise to those individuals that subsidy will help multiple generations of homeowners. So we will oversee any time that somebody is reselling the property to make sure that somebody that is buying it fits the criteria of the Community Land Trust, that they have a certain AMI, which is the area median income. So here are just some of the ideas of stewardship. Now, we have a broad range of folks that want to create a home buyer club, a support network to help folks get into home ownership. We have the Durham Community Land Trustees, which is one of the older CLTs, helping folks with possibly reducing their property taxes because the county has programs to help reduce that burden. In New Orleans, they were really big on making sure that people have wills and succession planning. How do we make sure that we are giving folks the opportunity to have a very large asset? We want to make sure that there is future planning. God forbid, when we move on, what happens to that asset? Now, as a part of this work, we also know that keeping up with the property is important. So here are two other ideas of stewardship, one coming from the Houston Community Land Trust, where they had a contractor come in to go ahead and to teach all of their homeowners about the proper maintenance of their air conditioning units. One Roof Housing, which is another community land trust in Duluth, Minnesota, they got a substantial grant from the Home Depot Foundation, and they turned that donation into a tool lending library with over 3,000 pieces of tools to be able to lend out to their homeowners free of charge. As what their board chairman would say, why does everybody need a $100 drill that they may only use 2 or 3 times in a year? We can buy the drills and we can lend them out for free. So let's hear from a homeowner as to what their journey has been with the Community Land Trust.
I became a homeowner having a play date with, I lived in a inclusionary housing building, and one of my daughter's friend's mom had a condo, and so I asked her how she could afford it because she was a single mother and we were talking about struggling with our finances, and she told me about the land trust and gave me the website, and that was the beginning. I moved professionally into an industry that I'm more excited about and more invested in. And not only that, but financially I'm more stable. And so over the years, I've been able to save more and kind of learn about different things that you can do or should do with your money. And as well as I was able to finish school, finish college, and raise my two children in the home, and as well as being able to work from home with the additional space, whereas before I had to travel 40 minutes to attend work. So it's really been a lot about stabilizing my children and my life and my work life, and also just really gaining awareness about the community that I'm going to be living in for a long term period.
So that is a testimony from Jackie. And one of the other smaller stories of Jackie's journey is that when she was actually giving birth to her second child and she was at the hospital, a tornado actually ripped through her community and her home was severely damaged. And it was actually the Community Land Trust that went to the hospital, and it was the executive director that sat down with her to explain to her that unfortunately she didn't have a home to go back to because it was damaged in this tornado. But the Community Land Trust has a home that it was going to sell, but they're going to set her up in that home for temporary use, and that they would be her agent in working with FEMA and working with the insurance agency and getting her home rebuilt. So again, that's where the Community Land Trust can go above and beyond the call of duty to really help their homeowners. But again, it's about helping those homeowners sometimes in the best of times and also in some of the worst of times. Unfortunately, we don't have time to do that, but I wanted to wrap up and see what questions we have and then actually ask Alex to come back. But I want to, just say thank you guys for the time tonight. And I hope that this motto has really touched you as much as it has touched me in close to my 40 years of doing this type of work. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Jason. I want to also mention, as a preliminary to my question, that as I stated earlier, we've been hearing about interest in land trust, community land trusts across the state of Connecticut as part of our Housing for All work. This is the Centers for Housing Opportunity, the Housing Collective, the All in Alliances, Naugatuck Valley Project, Team Inc., Bethel Center, and Connecticut for All. And the aim of a lot of our work right now is in rural and suburban communities. I heard a little bit from you. We heard a little bit from you about New Communities Inc. I'm wondering if there are other contemporary examples of in rural and suburban communities of community land trusts that come to mind as foremost from elsewhere in the United States that those in Connecticut and rural suburban communities might look to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think when you think about some of the suburban areas and also small towns, we have a number of different examples throughout the country, including also in the state of Georgia. So when you think about, the Athens Community Land Trust in Georgia, currently right now, I'm actually working with a habitat in Greensboro, Georgia, as they are converting their model into a community land trust. We also have a few examples in North Carolina, also in Virginia. Again, there's over 340 of these CLTs throughout the country, and I will actually invite folks to go to the Grounded Solutions Network website, where we have an interactive map where you can actually see all of the different dots in the entire country and be able to pick on one, and it will give you some information about that CLT and where they are.
Great, thank you. Another question we have is Connecticut behind other states in terms of CLTs? And if so, why?
So, I mean, I think when you think about states, when you think about cities, and when you think about the ecosystem that's needed to really support community land trust, there's only a few that I would say are leading the pack and that everybody else is falling behind. When you think about, like in Vermont, you have a CLT that has thousands of units in their portfolio. That could only be done because the state went ahead and made a conscious decision to invest in that model. When you think about other CLTs, even in your state of Connecticut, and you hear from them, and I know a few of them are here on this call, would say that, it's so hard to convince government that this is a better investment than to just take the money and throw it away after 10 or 15 years. So I would say that yes, your state is definitely falling behind. There should be a lot more community land trust throughout the entire state because we know we have an affordable housing crisis. And if we don't put something in place now, this crisis is only going to get worse later on.
Thank you for that. One thing I also want to plug from Grounded Solutions. So recently I attended a webinar on HFAs in support of community land trusts, and the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency was on there, and the Colorado Housing Finance Authority. And there were some great examples of state and quasi-state financial agencies and authorities, and talking through examples of how they are able to support community land trusts and their growth in their respective states. So, with that, I'll go to the next question. Do private investors ever get anything in return? Preferred ownership for their workforce, for example.
So we have worked with, excuse me. So there have been some community land trusts that have been sponsored and actually created by private investment. One of the larger ones is actually the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Now, the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, man, needed their workforce to be closer to their facility because they wanted to get a Trauma One certification from the federal government. But they realized that a lot of their nurses couldn't afford homes in that area. So what they did is they actually endowed a community land trust and gave them land to go ahead and start doing some housing for their lower paid employees to be closer to their facility. So that's just one example of, private investment coming in and realizing that it's smart and good business having your workforce be closer, because whether you're going after whether you're going after a certain designation or whether you just need your workforce closer to your facility, makes all the sense in the world. And why not keep it permanently affordable?
Wonderful. Next question. Can a neighborhood use a CLT to buy a commercial property, in this case, an unused school building in their neighborhood?
Absolutely. I mean, my community land trust in Boston, Massachusetts, we actually had the ability to buy a former bank. And we actually turned that commercial property into now a mixed use development by bringing more rental housing into our community and by having first floor commercial spaces. So from a school perspective, absolutely, you can buy any property that you want with the community land trust. Now it's about where do you find the resources and the capital to be able to make such a purchase. For us at Dudley Street, we heavily relied on our municipal government because they wanted to get that commercial space and put it back into productive use. So they felt like it was a wiser decision to invest in something that was going to be permanently affordable than to just try to have a developer come in, buy it, and then it's just market rate housing.
I think these questions are flowing very nicely into each other, because the next one is, who makes sure the land trust keeps their commitment to the community?
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that the founders really wanted to make sure that membership was hardwired into their model. When you take a look at Grounded Solutions, we're the steward of a model ground lease and also model bylaws for community land trust. We also have a 400-page technical manual if you wanted to go ahead and try to create a CLT on your own, or small plug, you can always hire Grounded Solutions because we do those TA services as well. But the founders believe that the membership and that this open membership concept of folks that are living in the community in which the CLT is serving should always have control over who gets to sit on that board of directors. And it's important to note that the founders believe so heavily that these members should have not just bylaws, in terms of making sure that they were hardwired into the bylaws, but anything about the resale formula. If land ever needed to be sold, it could not be sold without a ratification of the membership. That's how much they believed in this concept of having a check and a balance on the nonprofit corporation, because they've seen other nonprofits, unfortunately, start to veer over to and get mission drift a lot.
Well, that goes into the next one, and this might be around some clarification. Who can own the land? A private owner, developer, owner of an underutilized hotel, local municipalities?
Yeah. So I think when you're thinking about who the CLT can buy from, they can buy from any of those folks. But once the community land trust owns the property, it's in the CLT's name. The CLT as a nonprofit organization would then be owners of that land in perpetuity. And again, the only way that they would be able to dispose of it is if the community voted and allowed them to say, yes, that makes sense to sell that property. And CLTs have in the past, because it made sense by the community to sell a piece of property, bring those revenues into the organization, and then invest it in more units.
How does this work in our cities like Bridgeport with limited land?
So the great thing about places that you're not manufacturing land anymore, that's one of the things my mentor used to say, it's a finite commodity that's there, is there's other opportunities when you think about, are there abandoned homes? Are there, investment ownership homes where that investor may at some point want to cash out? We have seen that throughout the country, a wave of these institutional investors starting to think, all right, the life of this home is coming to an end. I want to get rid of it. So is there a way that your community land trust can purchase that? The other thing in certain communities that we know of is that we have an aging population. And sometimes CLTs can actually leverage the fact that we have families that have historically lived in a community for generations and might be coming to the end of their family lineage. And could that person go ahead and put that land in their will to be transferred into your CLT? These are different ideas that when you have a place that might have not a lot of land but have a lot of buildings, you have to be nimble enough to think about what are some other development opportunities that could be brought to bear. Are there some municipal buildings where the city owns it, and maybe you can get the city to again donate that into the community land trust so that it can get back into productive use?
Another very in some cases urban, I think suburban, also rural. This is about relating to tax-based question. With CT municipalities, Connecticut municipalities struggling to make up revenue from places other than property tax,
Mm.
how have some CLTs been able to tackle similar issues?
Yeah, and the great thing is that under a community land trust, we do believe in fair taxation. So the homeowner should be paying a fair tax on the improvements on the property. So we believe that that's important, but we also have to realize that in certain cities and especially in a state, you also have a tax ecosystem that if you're working with like empty land that's not getting any tax revenue into it, what I've always said to tax assessors is, would you rather like 100% of nothing or at least something? Let me at least build an affordable home there and you'll get some tax revenue from the actual home itself, but you'll also get a person that may be shopping in that vicinity, and then there goes sales tax. So we want to think about how do we increase the taxability? We have to continue to think about the population, and especially in areas that may have a lot of vacant land, how do we repopulate that? And it's not just based on the real estate taxes, but we also have to think about the sales tax that we pay for certain materials as well.
One thing that brings to mind in response to your response is in Connecticut, as in many places in the Deep South and growing, I think, around the world, there's a increased private equity ownership of housing and land, and in many cases, we've faced this in Waterbury with Waterbury Hospital. Um, Private equity owners seemingly can promise great speculative gains, of course, for their investors, but also uh, seemingly also a growth in the tax base. And what we see is actually sometimes major tax delinquency issues. And so I'm not sure if that is something that you have seen elsewhere in the United States, but that is actually a curiosity I've had about whether that's been observed elsewhere in comparison to community land trusts, where there's a sustainability built in for homeowners.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's very easy, and this happens a lot with other affordable housing mechanisms. It's incredibly easy to get somebody into a home. The challenge is how do you keep them there? Because there are factors like real estate taxes that, again, if you don't have a mechanism to be able to cushion how tax increases year after years happen, then you could easily put somebody into a home and within 10 years, just on the taxes alone, may become unaffordable for them. So I mean, I think that there is this idea of, at least with a community land trust, we try to work with the taxing authority and sympathize with them because we know that they have a hard job to do. They have this balancing act of trying to bring in more revenue because there's more services that are needed, and they only have a certain limited population that they can draw from.
I think these next two questions relate to some of what you had just said. Why not allow the property to be sold with the land at a low price, plus the house, and deed restrict the land so the homeowner owns the land and the house?
Absolutely. It's a great question, and it's a question that happens all the time. Um, I would, I, I challenge the fact that there's ever truly any ownership of land. Because if you don't pay taxes, what happens? You can lose your land. If you don't keep up your land, what can happen? The city can do code enforcement and rack up enough liens where they go ahead and take your land. It's a mentality that I believe the founders really worked on to say, we can do this collectively together, and we will be so much stronger than if we try to do this individually. The other part is, just from a legal standpoint, that deed restrictions are just not as durable when you think about affordability compared to a ground lease. I can tell you plenty of stories of especially municipalities, because municipalities love putting deed restrictions on properties. And I can tell you where some deed restrictions got misfiled, it didn't get indexed correctly, and these individuals were able to sell their home and actually get away from the deed restriction because it was never caught by a title examiner. Versus under a ground lease, because of that dual ownership structure, there's no way to get around that. Anytime that you would pull, title or any public record, it would show two owners, and that would make people stop and be like, wait a minute, I got to figure this out. Versus a deed restriction, there are just so many different loopholes, and you're relying on so many other people to enforce it that it's not a durable model. I mean, I will say that deed restrictions have come a long way from the 90s where all of these horror stories happen. But at the end of the day, through our research, through our study of the land trust and ground leasing, it's a far superior model.
Thank you for that. That also brings to mind something else in Connecticut that we're seeing more of, which is land banks. And so the issue around liens is it can cut both ways in terms of what kind of policies we have at the municipal level, what we're encouraging at the state level in terms of are those tax liens becoming are those becoming sort of a source or a mechanism that further transfers wealth to out of state absentee owners? Or could they be, as some municipalities have been proposing, and I believe some municipalities have done at some scale, a means of maybe transferring to a land bank, which can
Yep.
then rehabilitate a property, put it in good shape, and then potentially transfer or sell over in partnership with community land trust. And I know there was a report recently that spoke about some of these examples.
Absolutely. There's a number of partnerships between land banks and CLTs. One of the most advanced one is actually in Atlanta, Georgia. Again, where you have a very robust land bank that allows the community land trust the first look at properties that are within side of their catchment area. Another great example is actually out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where there is another land bank there that works with the local community land trust named City of Bridges, where again, the land bank again transfers those properties into the CLT because those land banks have made a policy decision that they want to advance lasting affordability.
This is a in the same spectrum. How did the Boston Land Trust, or I believe DNI, DSNI is probably alluded to here, work with the city to use eminent domain?
So our eminent domain power was actually ours. So the city of Boston actually transferred that authority over to our nonprofit. Now, our community, if you can picture it, our target area was about 60 acres of land. About 32 acres of that land was vacant. And it was vacant through white flight. It was vacant because of arson for profit. And that was predominantly in the 70s and 80s, that our community was literally left devastated. And the community itself created a revitalization plan on its own. The city wanted to come with their own plan, and the community rejected that and said, we're going to do this ourselves. And a part of that revitalization plan was really to map out what could be possible on all of this vacant land. And one of the things that came very clear is if we were to try to go and negotiate property owner to property owner, it would never get done. So we had some amazing attorneys, some pro bono attorneys that actually was along this journey with us. And they pointed out that there was a clause within inside of Massachusetts general law that allowed for the city to designate a organization as a redevelopment authority. So we just needed to apply. And along with applying, we did some organizing campaigns. We made sure we did some power mapping. We put our plan in a number of different places. We worked with a lot of folks with inside city government before we went to the mayor to get allies along the way. But one of the things that was clear was we also saw some political stars lining up where our white mayor wanted to be reelected and he really wanted the African American vote. And he really wanted our community to come out and support him. So one of the things that we said is, hey, if we can get this power, then, our community will support you in the way that politics run. And we were able to have all of these stars line up. And I can tell you that it wasn't easy. But, and honestly, the city said, and this is what's captured in the book and also in our documentaries, where you have city officials saying, honestly, we gave it to them because we knew that they were just going to give it back to us. Because there's no way that these folks in these lower income communities have the capability of using this type of power. Well, we proved them all wrong. We got all 32 acres under our control. And it really wasn't that we had to go to court to do any of this. Eminent domain gave us the legal stick to bring all of these landowners to the table. And I can tell you right now, there were some landowners that were living in Florida, and they was like, I don't own land in Boston. What are you talking about? And it was because they got it through their heirship, 3 and 4 generations, that they were the ones left with it, that they went ahead and they actually quickly sold because they was like, I don't want this. So for us, it was one of those tools that we were able to actually activate. And at the same time, it's important to note that for Boston, we had so many political stars lining up that to replicate that may not be feasible.
And on a note, I think uh, where it may not be feasible, there are some other powerful examples around the country of where we've seen some stars align. I mean, eminent domain is not something I've heard replicated, but I just saw a documentary recently in Cooper Square. That was
Yep.
quite amazing to see a 50-year fight result in a community land trust stewarding mutual housing. With us in the Naugatuck Valley project, there was a 4 or 5 year long fight to acquire land from the city and have the 6 housing cooperatives financed through state bonding.
Mm.
So and stars didn't align there, and which we'll get a little bit more into in subsequent webinars of examples of CLTs in Connecticut, but then ultimately did because it was a very, very, very hard fight. And what was the engine of it was the community really moving through it together and organizing together, and
Yes.
also having the adjoining technical capacity to execute. Um, in terms of stars aligning and actors being involved, have union work? One question is, have union workers been involved in these projects?
Mm. So so for Boston, we have to, and because we're using federal funds, we have to go by the Davis-Bacon Act. So while the unions were not necessarily a part of any of our developments and stuff like that, the non-union construction developers were still paid a substantial wage of being able to get these units constructed and built.
I will say one example from us from Naugatuck Valley Project is a very long time UAW leader, was a founder of the Brookside Housing Cooperatives in our CLT, and one of our leaders today recounts how he lives and has lived ever since founding it because that person brought him in. So there's a range of potential connections around this, and hopefully we'll see more of it. Another question: how are new homeowners selected? Does the
Hmm.
CLT have control, or must they consider any applicant who meets the financial criteria?
It's a great question. Um, so most community land trusts in our best practice in which we teach, especially new CLTs to utilize, is a two-step process. One is what's called a interest pool. And an interest pool allows for folks that are interested in your program to come in to one, learn about your program, understand that This is not the traditional home ownership that we've all been conditioned around, and that there are some restrictions in place. So that's the first step. The second step is that when a home comes up, what we do is we allow for folks in that interest pool to opt in or opt out of a lottery. We don't necessarily do first come, first serve when it's housing, because of the fact that a lot of times we're trying to get to folks that have been either unhoused or are not a part of the mainstream of real estate. So to level the playing field, we allow for this interest pool, and then we allow for a lottery system to actually pick the individuals that are all based on a standard criteria around AMI, which is their income limit. We want to make sure that they're mortgageable, so they have to come in with a pre-approval. They have to make sure that they've gone through the education, so the first-time home buyer class. And we also try our best to match families to unit size. So because we know that for at least most CLTs, you're not going to build all of the units that you're going to have demand for. One CLT that's actually just about to close on their units is the fact that they built 42 townhomes in New York City. They got over 2,100 applications for those 42 homes. So again, they ran through a lottery system. They were able to, at least level the playing field for folks and give folks, a relatively same shot at getting into the homes.
Can the CLT own multiple single family lots versus large parcels with multiple homes?
Absolutely. A scattered site is a lot of times where CLTs are, especially when you are missing what planners would call the teeth in a street, which are, usually a lot in between two homes, where a CLT may get control of that, build a home. And again, you may have only two homes on a street, and you may be in a very large area where you have this scattered site.
And to that, so the CLT's land can be in non-contiguous pieces around an area.
Absolutely. Our 32 acres within inside of a 60-acre area, there were some areas where we only had maybe 4 or 5 units on a street. So everything else was privately owned and already had a building on it. So
Another question, how does a housing co-op fit into the community land trust model?
So in my experience, I was able to actually develop 2 cooperatives on our community land trust. One was 36 units, the other one was 41 units. And again, the community wanted to have different housing styles and different housing types. So we did cooperatives as a way of the CLT is there to backstop anything that the cooperators could possibly do. So as we all know, there's plenty of history in like New York City of cooperatives that went ahead and voted to go ahead and take away those imposed restrictions on themselves and then sell out. The same thing is true with cooperatives on CLTs, where again, the cooperative may have financing for 20 years, 30 years, that may have restrictions because of that financing. But what would happen if the cooperative paid that off in 30 years? And then in 31, 32 years, you get cooperators that are like, wait a minute, we can vote to cash out and make a lot of money. Why wouldn't we do that? If you put it on a community land trust, again, you have a circuit breaker, you have a backstop where they could try to do that, but they're on a ground lease. So they have to adhere to permanent affordability.
Is there a typical standard community land trust fund and a community land trust funding revenue approach for sustaining operations? Can you comment about how CLTs can find sustainable funding that they can use for stewardship, which largely comes down to staffing, without needing to tie the funding to a new development project?
Yeah, it's a great question. I remember a number of years ago, we invited the Harvard Business School in to take a look at the model. And it only took them a day to be like, this is the worst model in the entire country. There's no way. Everything that we've been taught, you guys don't do. Um, so the way the founders really made certain decisions about this model is one is they put it into a 501c3. They said that this should be a nonprofit, charitable, or organization that should be able to leverage donations from the public and also from the private. There are some CLTs that get regular funding from their municipal government because their municipal government understands that the CLT is an extension of city services, that the CLT is playing an important part of continuing to build homes and steward homes so that they could actually have a full functioning city. I'm actually on a site visit right now in the city of Baltimore, and the city of Baltimore has set up a operating fund where every year CLTs here get $100,000 that is unrestricted, that can go towards operating, that can go towards stewardship. Because the city here understands that the idea of permanent affordable housing is important for the revitalization of the entire city. So some CLTs have created social enterprises that help bring in additional revenue into their organization. One Ruth Housing, also in Minnesota, they have a construction company, which is their social enterprise. So they're able to not just do their own construction on their CLT homes, but able to do also private property construction as well. Some CLTs run their own real estate brokerage companies where they have realtors on staff. And again, those fees come back into their organization. A lot of CLTs have a rental portfolio where, again, revenue that comes off of that rental portfolio helps to fund the organization. But again, the idea of sustainability has to be paired with the idea of scale, and that you need a lot of units to be sustainable. We always see that, and we call it the nightmare scenario, where you're not able to do any new development, but you need to at least have one staff member that if any of your homeowners call, that somebody will pick up the phone. That number is 100 units. You need 100 units in your portfolio to be able to sustain one staff member to be able to run your organization if you go stagnant with development.
We're getting close to time, but maybe a few more questions we have here. One is there any precedent for collaboration between a privately managed family trust and a community land trust, specifically models where a personal trust and CLT engage in a joint venture to acquire and steward property together to serve both family legacy goals and community affordability?
Absolutely. I mean, City of Lake CLT has created a legacy program where they actually don't just allow folks to will the property into the CLT. They want the family legacy to continue to live on. So they actually name the building after the family legacy name. And they actually create a plaque that goes on to the building so that the family story continues to live on. So again, it's taking that idea of, you have lived in this community for 4 generations. You might be at the end of your family, line. That doesn't need to just evaporate and go invisible. because you want to donate that property into the CLT, we will have your legacy live on. And when they do that, they also put a restriction that the homeowner cannot touch those items on the home. So it's not like a homeowner can come in and just take off the plaque, take off the name of the property. It's celebrated in the community that, hey, this was the Joneses' homes, and this is a little write-up of what they've done. As we know, because we're in New England and we have a long historical, trend that certain historical society organizations will do this on some of the historical homes in certain areas. I used to live in Salem, Massachusetts, and there's a bunch of homes where they have a small plaque that has like the name of the person that lived there and what their occupation was. So Salem being, around maritime and everything else, you would see folks that used to be, captains and whalers and all that other stuff. The CLT is literally leveraging that same piece and saying that, no, these are also historical homes and working with these family trusts to get it done.
I'll make this our last question. Are you aware of CLTs that prioritize first responders, teachers, healthcare workers?
Absolutely. So the new community land trust in Ann Arbor, Michigan, launched, and one of their preferences for home ownership is all critical workers. And they define critical workers as folks that are working in these specific industries. And that is a part of their website, that is a part of their online application, is just to let folks know that anybody can apply, but we're giving preference to these individuals there.
Great, thank you. So, thank you so much again, Jason, for doing this. What a wide range of questions and incredible range of answers, and it's incredible to see how much the CLT model continues to grow and meet a variety of needs and a variety of capabilities to expand and to sustain. So again, thank you. If we were in a room, I would ask everybody to give a round of applause. So I'll just do it. And I want to remind everyone that this is the first of three webinars. The next one will be on community land trusts in Connecticut. The third, we will have Brenda Torpy from Champlain Housing Trust. Uh, and also, before you go, I want to note that there will be a survey, a poll that pops up as you leave that'll ask you about where you're coming from. We'd like to get a good sense. We have a sense from the RSVP list, but helpful to know who was here. And the range of questions really show what has been a hunch in our minds that we might need to do more than three webinars. We want to keep this going. A lot of the questions that were asked here are ones that I've had. And so thank you all for putting forward the questions you've put forward. Again, thank you for your presentation, Jason, and for taking the time to answer questions from people here in Connecticut who want to see the CLT model grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all.